We've kind of been talking about some ground rules. So how are we doing on the video, Katie? Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the joint interim. I almost said Transportation Committee because I see my colleague over there, but the Joint Interim Revenue Committee. And actually the Senate, Mr. Chairman, the Senate side is so tired from all the revenue bills you sent us this year that we're not really up for this. We just need a nap, need a vacation. I want to welcome all the new members, a lot of new faces, new co-chairman. Thank you for coming. Thanks to all in the audience. I see most of the usual groupies. We thought we'd basically, we've got a list of topics. We have discussed that we're not really going to settle on all these topics today. We're going to get them out there so we can mull on them a little bit. Let people have their say about what topics they want to see us take up. Maybe discuss a couple more things, and then possibility we're thinking about a Google poll with respect to the members. It's not really it'll give the chairman a little bit of a indication of what people are thinking and which way to go. It's not an absolute ranking, and if number one on the Google poll may or may not make it in there. So, but it'll help us all out. So anything you want to add, Mr. Co-Chairman? Welcome to Revenue. Let me just say, Joint Interim Revenue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually served on Revenue back in the day. It's been a few years ago, but appreciate the opportunity to serve with you and the rest of the senators and try to get done what's doable. Keep moving forward. So, and I think part of this deal, there's such a turnover. We're all here for a little speck of time, but this education piece for all of us, and to keep some of the veterans out there in the audience, you've gone through it before, but we're going to go through it again, and we just got it's never-ending process. So, look forward to our work together.
As well. So maybe quickly go through the list of topics here and then open it up for public comment. So these are topics we have so far. Senator James, we've got, as I understand, you've whittled yours down to being the usage tax. Is that right? And the other two issues on your list have gone to committee. So, and then Mr. Co-Chairman, industrial revenue bonds. To study I should read this up here for the first one. There are different revenue ideas that either produce revenue, deal with spending, and ideas to bring in new businesses. So the usage tax. Senator James, you want to give that just a couple of sentences?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is basically just restructuring the severance tax, and that's pretty much that in a nutshell. Just restructuring the severance tax to include wind and solar and making it more even across the board and including more people. So, and I'll go into more detail when I explain it.
Okay. Mr. Co-Chairman, industrial revenue bonds.
Mr. Chairman, really just try to learn what other states are doing successful as far as they kind of group. We have the potential for this in our Constitution, but we'd never use it. It's underutilized, and make this maybe a tool for state or local governments, economic development. And most states pair these with tax incentives. We don't really have many taxes to give away, but I think there's some of those we can work with. And then my thoughts, I think, but just to learn more about it, what other states are doing, why are some states attracting these large distribution or large manufacturing or even light manufacturing outfits. And we know some of that, but I think there's other states that are using this bonding provision along with zoning and taxing to do a pretty good job. So I'd like to just learn a little more about it. It's really like.
Thank you. Very good. The next is Representative Scott Heiner, proposed interim topic, sales tax exemption review. Anybody want to talk about that? We have a kind of a tradition of doing exemption reviews in the committee, and sometimes we actually add exemptions when we do that review, but this talks about just sales tax. I will point out that there are other taxes that have exemptions. Your wind tax, for example, has an exemption up front for the first 3 years. It's not really a sales tax. There are even exemptions within the property tax world. So we may want to broaden that if we really want to look at exemptions. The next one is Municipal Taxing Authority, brought by the same representative. Review possible amendments to the optional sales tax is enacted in HB 47 in 2020. We did pass that bill out of the Senate, by the way, that expands the number of days that tax can be voted on. But this would be with the goal of expanding that availability of tax to make it more user-friendly. The next one is from myself. It's Medicaid Expansion. I don't think I have to explain what that is to all you guys, but we did pass it out of the Revenue Committee a couple of years ago, and I know the opinions are divided on it, but it remains there. Picking up ad valorem tax wind generation facilities. Got a contact person of Dan Neal. We definitely discuss that, and we'll have some people testifying on that. Representative Sweeney, you've got tobacco tax equivalent. It's funny, I look around and you're definitely still on this committee. You're not on corporations. I used to see every meeting I went to all the time. Do you want to talk about yours?
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman. So as you're keenly aware, with the reservation, there's not parity up there. And my understanding is that perhaps Joint Tribal is also going to explore this also. If you've got a comment on that.
So Representative Sweeney, what I think a tribal is going to do is review the progress of implementing the compact between the tribal governments and the state of Wyoming with respect to tobacco taxes. And that is for tobacco tax equivalents. There has been some discussions between the governor's office and the tribes, but I'm not sure that we've really got anywhere at this point. So is that the same thing? Okay, we can continue to monitor that. We passed the enabling legislation a couple of years ago, so it's kind of up for the parties to decide if they want to do this now. The next one. Representative Yin, Sales Tax Allocation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I mean, I did have a bill with regards to optional sales tax. I think what I would really be interested in is just a broader topic of how municipalities and counties can help fund themselves. So what options can we give them? And that's what I would be interested in. Thank you.
Okay. Next one, Representative Gray, Property Tax Control Review.
Thanks, Chairman Case. Appreciate it. This is the big one I submitted. There was one other, and I know Chairman Harshman kind of submitted the other one too, but we've had a lot of problems on property tax in Natrona County and assessment, a lot of problems in Teton County, but I think every county seems to, in waves, have some problems. And we had a cap bill that we tried to get through. It didn't happen, wasn't brought in committee, the whole past 7-2 over in the House. But what I want to do in this interim topic, and I do think it will take some time, but I'm really excited about it. And I think there's potential for agreement, is to take the property tax statute from T to green. And I think there's a couple issues. One is on the assessment side, acquisition value versus continuing the system we have. Should we have a cap if we continue the system we have? Also, whether we should be a disclosure state. And that's a big item that we had a bill drafted. We did not bring it this year. The realtors have had a lot of discussions on it. There's a lot involved in the assessment side, and then also the appeals, which I think the appeals statute has a lot of problems in it. So what I want to do, and I do think it would take probably potentially even one day or one day in the first two meetings each, is that to review that statute almost line by line, or at least paragraph by paragraph, and then we go through each part of it and take each issue. And you know, I just ask, please give consideration to it. I'm pretty excited about the potential for this. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next one, we've got a representative, or Mr. Co-Chairman, Revenue Recovery through Workforce Protection.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can see the ideas brought to us by Tammy Johnson. I think And I think it's an interesting, I think it's a good idea. And so where we give out exemptions to taxes, come here. The idea is to also apply our workforce preference statutes. If you're going to benefit from our exemptions and not pay taxes, at least hire our people. And so I think it's an interesting idea.
Would it also include other benefits that the state provides to business recruitment, things like that, potentially?
Mr. Chairman, I think, I think we could dive into all that. I think there's a lot for us to learn on how electric bills get paid, all those things. It'd be good. I think a good topic for us.
Great. The next one's a double down. I'm not sure quite why I got double down, but it's a Medicaid expansion. Wyoming Women's Foundation, Rebecca Smith, similar to what we discussed earlier. And by the way, everybody's gonna get their chance to talk. We're just trying to get through the committee on these subjects right now. So Representative Roscoe, you've got sales tax exemption sunset, a little bit similar to what we had earlier.
Yeah, I would just like to go over, how we help industry by giving these exemptions, but we don't really have a clean way to get rid of them. And we seem to hear a lot about them all the time. And this would just help us get through that. And I think Mr. Fraser will help us a little more with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Roscoe. Next one is one submitted by myself. It's regulation. Certainly, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to build on the opportunity that may be presented with looking at these exemptions. Maybe break it out into two parts, those things that create jobs and make benefit for Wyoming and those things that don't. And then sort of adjust, the whole period of when it's applicable.
Fair enough. I wouldn't mind letting us see all our exemptions and see how much they cost us in terms of jobs that they retain. I think there's a lot of poor information out there, actually. We actually have better information, but I think we're ignoring it. Next one is regulation of marijuana. Sounds like a revenue source to me. The next one after that is Representative Gray, distribution of existing revenue streams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that Chairman Harshman also submitted this one on a separate email, but I think we need to do a comprehensive look at the existing revenue streams, what accounts they go to. I've always believed that's very important because you plop these revenue streams in the general fund, they get spent. And when you have deficits in other areas, you need to look at whether that's appropriate. I know there's a bill we're hearing today in the House that does a lot of this. I don't think that bill quite gets it right. We'll see whether it gets through or not. But regardless of whether the bill passes or not, this is always a continuous discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you want anything, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And Josh, I wanted to, it was in an email that I was sent to all the committee with, but it's 28-1-118. And if you can look that up and just, I remember Chairman of Appropriations, I wanted to study these exact same revenue flows and Management Council. Listened to me and said, thanks, but no thanks. And then we find this statute where we're supposed to be doing this every 4 years. And I don't think it's ever been done. And it's severance, FMR, and inheritance tax. And it's charged to this committee.
Actually, I've got it here.
Yeah. So, and Josh, do you have it up as well? Maybe you guys, can you just read it for everybody here? Just. Thanks.
Says the Joint Revenue Interim Committee shall submit a report to the governor and legislature by December 1, 2004, and by December 1 of each fourth year thereafter, reviewing the distribution formula for the federal mineral royalties, severance taxes, and inheritance taxes.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's ever been done. And
Must have missed it.
I must have missed it. And so I think as we, those were in that de-earmarking era. That was quite a fight. It was for my time. You were in on that. You were probably a House member. And so I think there's been some reluctance, but I think you could take a look at inflation, what's one time, those kind of things. Is the cap in the right spot still? So those would all be good discussions. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think I've got all the ones that were actually submitted. We also talked about continuing with our electric utility work and the gross electricity tax. We've talked about that one. Anything else that we need before we open it up to the public?
Mr. Chairman, I think too, we've talked about exemptions, but we haven't talked about services, and that was written down on.
Yeah.
I think we tax 66 services. South Dakota, 153. Washington State was a sales tax only state. They have a gross receipts tax, but over 200. And I think Texas, 100, more than South Dakota. And I think, former Chairman Madden used to always say it, and I remember him on the House floor and he'd hold his scales, 40 years ago, 70%, right, goods, 30% services. And over time, we as a population have kind of shifted that where it's most of our money is spent 70% services. And we're going to continue, I'm sure, to be a sales tax state, not an income tax state. And we want to keep looking at how do we modernize that. And boy, it's a tough deal. But I think we got to think about that and keep looking at it because it affects local governments and affects state government as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Down at the end, Dr. Hallinan.
I think we need to look at the sales tax, or not the sales tax, but the property tax. We talk about the way that industry pays the biggest part of that property tax. And yet the major benefit is to the schools. And that's the general population of our state. And I think we need to look at the way this property tax is distributed, how it's collected, and see to it that it more fairly represents where it goes. So I think that's a good issue for us to look at, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing that the good co-chairman said about not being a personal income tax state, I think that there is one thing that I would be very interested in looking at would be an unearned income tax, which is something that 2 states that don't have a personal income tax do have a unearned income tax. So I think that would be useful for our committee to look at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fair enough. Thank you. Representative Graylow. Let's not get in a debate about these taxes. We got a lot of people that want to.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Case. No intent.
New topic.
Yeah, new topic. I did, I know Senator James kind of withdrew his cash-based budget thing. I did bring in a bill on that. It was sent to revenue about 2 years ago. And I do think it's an appropriate topic. And I'd add to that, putting a cap on at least the general fund, the growth in the general fund. And so I know I would like to add that as a potential topic, cash-based budgeting and also capping the year-to-year growth in particular funds. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Possibly those could be more on the expenditure side, which is thinking more like appropriations and we still are the revenue committee when we come out of this, but we'll definitely let people react to that. Okay, what I'd like to do is open it up. Maybe we could be letting a couple people in online. In the meantime, let's start here in the room. Who would like to address us first? Mr. Larson, you're very brave. Yeah, we're going to be quick about rotating through these. Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the hearing aid. Now I'm hearing myself twice.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Did you get the vaccination? Maybe it's the microchip kicking in.
It might be, sir. Members of the committee, Mark Larson with the Wyoming Petroleum Marketers Association and Convenience Store Association. We want to thank Rep. Sweeney for bringing the issue on the tobacco tax equivalents. 2 years ago, Senate File 51 asked the governor to work with the tribes to come up with a compact and work towards that end. Way back in 2011, then Excise Tax Director Dan Noble struck an agreement with the reservation retailers that they would voluntarily submit taxes on sales to non-Native Americans. In no way do we ever want to go against the agreement of 1868, where the tribes do not pay taxes on tobacco products. But that agreement right now is not audited. There's no oversight whatsoever, and it's left up to the retailers to report sales to non-Native Americans. More to the point, the issue of other tobacco products, those are not a part of the agreement. So there are no taxes assessed to the tribal or the reservation retailers on other tobacco products. 12 states have followed the Supreme Court's guidance on 5 different times that they've said that it's the state's responsibility, indeed their obligation, to collect those taxes and stop the tax avoidance issue. What we're suggesting is that we, and in concert with the Tribal Relations Committee's good work on working with the tribes, and they have a bright new chairman down in the Northern Arapaho and Chairman Dresser, is come up with a compact similar to the gas tax compact that's in place that's benefiting the tribe now. What that compact would do is say we will tax all tobacco products at the wholesale level, like they are for everybody else in the state, including OTPs. And then the tribe would strike a compact and get all of the revenue for the sales that they make. And right now, Mr. Chairman, we don't care if it's Native American or non-Native American. If they want to get the tax back on all sales that they generate, at least we will have leveled the playing field at the retail level. What that does for the state too is that gets us out of the discussion when you start talking about nominal tobacco tax increases of us constantly coming and saying, if you do that, all those non-reservation retailers are going to be put at a detriment as the tribe realizes a significant windfall every time you increase the tax. So we're looking for parity. We're looking for a good deal for the reservations. I think that we've seen numbers that would almost double the current proceeds that they're getting for their tobacco cessation programs and other programs. We think it's a win-win. We just hope that we can get the tribes there. As I said, Director Noble has started that discussion back in 2011. We haven't made any grounds. And to be straightforward, if I was a tobacco retailer on the reservation, I wouldn't want you to do anything either, because then I've got that windfall of the tax disparity because I'm not paying tax at the wholesale level.
Okay.
With that, Mr. Chairman, we would hope that we would be able to forward this issue with the committee.
Questions for Mr. Larson? Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Larson, I think this topic is being brought up with the Tribal Relations Committee too this morning. Yeah, I think it's on their list. Is that correct? I'm not positive.
Mr. Larson, I might just jump in. I think it is going to be part of the tribal committee. It's not really an either or, it's a partnership. I serve on both the committees. I'm not sure, Representative Sweeney, are you still on the tribal committee? Caught you with your mouth full, sorry. But anyway, it's more like liaison between. And if I might tag on, Mr. Larson, are you expecting new legislation? Or are you expecting us to try to get the old legislation implemented, the compact legislation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question, Representative Roscoe, as well. What we're identifying is the 12 states that have tackled this issue have had to change the statute in order to allow the tribe, whether they want to come up with their own stamp or we have a separate stamp. We have to change the statute so that the OTPs and the cigarettes can be taxed at wholesale regardless where they go in the state.
Gotcha.
That's the legislation we'll need.
Thanks. Anybody else for Mr. Larson? Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, committee.
On deck, who's next? Ms. Johnson, come on up. I'm kind of informally timing people. Mostly, I'm just trying to move things along. So I might let you know when we get to 2 minutes, but I'm not trying to cut you off.
I've never said anything in 2 minutes. Mr. Chairman, my name is.
Welcome,
Tammy
Ms. Johnson.
Members of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson. I'm with Wyoming State AFL-CIO, and there was a topic in here that Representative Harshman and I presented together, and it's come since I've been working with AFL-CIO, and I've been privy to several incidences that have happened across the state just in the last 4 or 5 months where we've had workers on the job here in Cheyenne. There's a large company that gets manufacturing sales and use tax break. They cleared out 42 plumbers and pipe fitters and brought in a bunch of guys from Texas, and now those paychecks are going to Texas. So they're not being spent here. Maybe some hotel money, maybe some restaurant money, but certainly not people who live and work here in Wyoming. So that's just one example. I could give you several others, but it's happened enough in my short time with AFL-CIO that I think it's worth us taking a look at and see if we can grab some revenue from some of those places and get those jobs back in Wyoming.
Great.
So
Thank you, Ms.
if
Johnson.
you have
You're
any
actually very
questions, I'm happy
prompt.
to answer them.
Questions for Ms. Johnson?
I tried to run it as a bill this session, but there were some stoppers with LSOs, so they felt like it needed more studies. So
Fair enough. Does that also include business incentives that we give? I mean, we give tax breaks. That's one type of incentive, but sometimes there's actually business grants and things that we give. to
I think
cover-
so. I think if we're not going to hire Wyoming workers, I think it's important that we're not, I mean, it's almost a pay to play kind of situation.
Mhm.
And I feel like the voice of the workers has been kind of shut out because they may not be able to pay when big companies are getting their foot in the game and they're calling the shots, and excuse me, the workers struggle to get even acknowledged. And then the tax structures are set up so that we don't even have to hire them. We did do a little bit of work this year on the definition of a Wyoming laborer.
Mhm.
And I would like to continue some work on that so that we're including some of the soft skills jobs in the state too. Perhaps some of the data centers that we have, maybe those workers aren't really Wyoming workers, but I understand there's some incredible tax incentives that go toward those industries. And my objection isn't that the tax incentive per se, it's that we're not hiring Wyoming workers. And we have a lot of people in this state who are unemployed or who want to stay here and work. I'm very proud my own daughter came back from 10 years in Boston to come back to Wyoming and work. And she found a way to do that. And I want to make that opportunity for a lot of our kids and a
Thank you,
lot of
Ms.
our
Johnson.
workers. So
Thank you so much. Any further questions? Thank you very much. Who's next? Mr. Fraser, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And you can see on your worksheet there that my name's associated with two of those issues. I'll mention them briefly. And I'm also able, if you'd like, I'm also able to address Representative Heiner's proposal regarding the municipal taxing districts, if you'd like me to cover
Sure.
that. I'll begin with the two that actually have my name associated with them. And those are being brought by Representatives Yan and Roscoe respectively. The first deals with the distribution of sales, the allocation, I should say, of sales tax. And again, as Representative Yan said earlier, it's really our members are trying to brainstorm any way they can to become financially independent. Historically, that split sent a higher percentage to locals than it does today. And my members would like to have a discussion of that. The other issue, which I think is significant. In fact, I've said the word exemptions enough time in this committee. I'm thinking about having a T-shirt made that I just wear to the committee.
Might be quicker.
Yeah. At any rate, our idea on this is, and we've looked at exemptions a number of different ways, and our idea here is that rather than talk about repealing any of them, that we would have legislation that would set sunsets on each of them. And then rather than talking about repeals in the future, the conversation would be the opposite. If something is still making sense, you could take an affirmative action to put it, to re-up it. A good quick example would be, the exemption on data centers. This session, we actually supported keeping that exemption in place because we felt like it was still providing a good economic development incentive that was working. But using that one as the example, would that still be providing the same benefit, 20, 30, 50 years from now? Who knows what that technology is even going to look like? So it would make sense to us to assign sunsets to those. And then again, you'd have the opportunity to go back in and extend those as you like. Those are the two that I was prepared to talk about. Would you like me to address the third, the taxing districts? Or
Go ahead if you can quickly. That'd be great.
You bet. Thank you again, all of you, for the work you've done on the municipal option tax, including last session and this session. That's a great tool. I think that's a tool that's going to be very helpful for our members. We did have one of our members that voiced the concern that they didn't have large enough tax base in their city for the municipal option tax to really generate the revenue they need. In their case, the streets are the issue that they're worried about, but that they have the users, you know, outside of the city that of course use all those roads and stuff. And the county was such that it's large enough and disparate enough that getting, you know, countywide agreement on the 6-cent tax has been tough. It tends that the north votes against it and the south votes for it. And this city is located in the south of the county I'm mentioning. I don't know if I'm supposed to be naming names or not, but in this setting, but at any rate, and so what we're looking for is there a way to do something municipal taxation like the municipal tax option tax, but within a district boundary? So right now you can either the voters can either approve a tax countywide or now citywide. And what this municipality was asking about is there a way to do that on a district level where it would include, you know, maybe part of a city, part of a county, maybe a couple of different cities and part of a county. And so that's really what this discussion would revolve around.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Fraser? Questions? Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the sales tax allocation. I think that's one that really should have some serious consideration this year, because with the cuts that we made to cities and towns, I think that percentage we need to take a really close look at it. I just kind of wondered when that change was made, the change in the percentage, why it was made. Maybe it was during downtimes. I'm not sure, but I wonder what the history was behind that.
Mr. Fraser, if you can.
You bet. So in our a few years ago, we submitted a couple of studies we had done to the legislature on municipal finances, and in that, and I'm not going to be able to quote it really specifically, but it shows 4 different times that was changed. Back in 1969, it was actually a 50-50 split, and then I can't remember the years, but it has taken 3 subsequent changes to get to the point we're at now, where it's 30% to the local, 69% to the state, and 1% of administration to the state. And as we discussed, I'll come better prepared with specifics on that.
Fair enough. Anything else from Mr. Fraser? Thank you, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you.
How about online? Have we got anybody that's ready so we can kind of swap back and forth?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. I have one person with their hand up, Dan Neal. I will admit him. If you would like to invite anyone else in the Zoom waiting room who would like to testify to raise their hand, I can let them in.
Yeah, let's do invite. I noticed there's some elected officials, which I believe are in the Zoom room. So, you know, we'd certainly like to hear from them, and we'd hear from them as early as possible, up to them. But Mr. Neal, go ahead. Oh, and while he's getting on, let me talk to the co-chairman about some housekeeping. I'm usually pretty tolerant about use of proper names in a committee setting. Sometimes it's necessary just to understand what's going on. So it's not the same rules as the floor, but you and I haven't discussed any of this. So Mr. Fraser brought it up, but if it's respectful and not harmful, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't refer to real things that are happening. It's not the same as the floor.
I agree.
So we have Mr. Neal. Should we go with you first, or should we go with Mr. Meyer, who's elected official? Mr. Neal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here representing the Wyoming Energy Forum. We proposed making a study based on Senate File 69 as amended by the Senate Revenue Committee this session. We saw that bill pass the committee, then it unfortunately died on general file. To us, that generally means that there are either some questions about the bill among members on the Senate floor, or maybe some influential interests are concerned about it and raised questions. So we think that this would be a way to address those questions, and we'll hope you'll move forward with this as a topic. Beyond that, I'd like to defer to Mr. Meyer, Ms. Huxtable, and Mr. Manier, who I believe is in the room there. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Neal. Mr. Meyer, Assessor Meyer, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman. I'm Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. You know, I didn't think that Bill 69 was going to be as much problems as it was. I mean, it seemed like the big thing was confidential information was being brought out, and there was basically only 2 assessors that had been looking at wind farms, myself and Ms. Huxtable. we were both looking into them. In fact, I did a research on about 15 states trying to figure out how we were doing them or how they were doing them as compared to Wyoming. So the problem was we couldn't really get an appraisal from Wyoming. And we saw things that, that the appraisal, they seem to be fairly incomplete. We just don't know. We needed some sample appraisals, and we were hoping for a few different companies where we could look at them. As far as the confidential information, I mean, I don't have to remind you that the assessors, we're elected officials, and we have a sworn oath to hear or favor us to the best of our ability and without fear or favor, assess all taxable property within the county of Park at its fair value. So help us God. So confidentiality, I mean, if we're going to look at state assessments, they don't take an oath for anything where we do. And I just didn't think it was going to be that much of a problem for us to get a better understanding if wind farms are valued fair as compared to other states too. And I'll tell you, looking at other states, there's a lot of discretion on how other states do wind farms. Some don't even value personal property, so that's out of the picture, but they do have other ways of doing it. So all we really want to do is to work with the Department of Revenue, find out how these are working. We're not giving anything away. In fact, as I was saying in the beginning, I don't even need the names of the companies, just the numbers and how they're doing it, and somebody to question things that we don't know. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any questions for Assessor Meyer? Thank you. Might as well get Assessor Huxtable. It's on the same issue and you're on TV.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. Just briefly on that topic of the wind farm, I concur with my colleague, Pat Meyer. We're just trying to work with the department, and I think we've started some great steps with that. Just today, I've had some emails with the Department of Revenue about sharing some data that probably wouldn't have happened as quickly if we had had the conversations regarding Senate File 69. So I think we're in the right direction. And I think if we can just work together as we move forward, I think it'll benefit everybody, including the state and the counties. While I'm on here, I was just going to touch base on a couple of the other topics, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. It's more efficient that way. Go ahead.
Okay, so the property tax limitation discussion, we are excited and willing to have a conversation and be a part of that on an interim topic. Basically, as the Representative Gray talked about, going from a market value to some other form of valuation is a big discussion for us, and a big not concern, but certainly a topic that we'd want to be a part of. And I just remind everybody that a lot of the issues that were raised during some of those discussions was not really the valuation. It wasn't so much the final value that came out in some of those cases. It was the jump in value. And so I want to just keep that very clear as we move forward in any kind of interim topic, that it may not be the market value that's the issue. It's more of the size of the jump. And certainly we can talk about how those occur and how we work on that in the interim. And then on to looking at property taxes general, I know one of the bills that came up, and I didn't see it specifically on your list, was some personal property tax discussions. And I had testified on some of those topics to committees that we would be happy to sit in an interim topic. So if that's part of that broad property tax look at, the assessors would certainly be willing to step up and have conversations in that realm as well. And then I would stand for any questions.
Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Any questions for Assessor Huxtable? And Assessor Huxtable, you're Converse County and you're also the president of the State Association. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I am from Converse County, and I am the legislative chair for the Assessors Association.
Thank you very much. Anything else? All right. Thank you all on TV. We'll go to real life for a little while. And if Mr. Manier, welcome, Chairman Manier. welcome back to the new Capitol.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go one step back so we'll know what the rest of this conversation was about. I have experiences both as the chairman of the Public Service Commission and the chairman of the State Board of Equalization with appraisal by the state of industrial properties. And to try to squeeze this into 2 minutes, here's the quick.
Nobody's done it yet. I'm just, we have an hour left and I'm just trying to move people along.
Okay. Basically, what happens with, and I'm concerned right here with what are called non-regulated wind farms. That is somebody that's not subject to some other government jurisdiction so that we know they're seeing their books and records. I'm not as worried, for example, about a wind farm that's run essentially by Pacific Corp as opposed to an independent, because I know that Pacific Corp's books are on record, so they're thoroughly seen and they're being taxed pretty completely and pretty fairly. The problem that I'm seeing with the non-regulated wind farms has cropped up from two sources that are published. One, a study by Rod Godbee, who examined wind taxes in the state and had some recommendations about that. And also more recently, a published statement by the Realtai Wind Project about how it intends to pay its property taxes. In both cases, what was suggested was that a method of taxation, which is not, to my knowledge, the way it actually works. They both ignored paying tax on the land. And since then, I've learned from the Department of Revenue that how that works in practice is that the department will take the footprint of the wind project and comes up with a discounted value on that. But fundamentally, that's okay, leaving two pieces that are not okay. First is that in both cases, it suggested that the only method of valuation that will be employed by the state is historic cost less depreciation. So you start out with the value of the facility, and over time it depreciates. So over time, the taxable value goes down as well. What's wrong with that is that the industrial appraisal method calls for at least two other methods of valuation. And if you were a power plant owned by Pacific Corp, for example, in your later years, even though the book value of the plant's dropping, you'll find that there is income that justifies a higher valuation for the plant. That's called the capitalized earnings method. So I don't know why those sources have done that. And I can't find out because all the information between the Department of Revenue and the taxpayer is confidential in this state. But that's one red flag for me. The other red flag for me is that both of these studies reported saying that the depreciation method used would be to depreciate the project over 20 years down to a 20-year base. Now, what that means, again, we got a graph like this. 20, you go directly to 20 years, drop to 20%, and then you just stay at a low number after that. Well, what happens to everybody else is if their life is 35 years, the depreciation runs over 35 years, right? So what they're proposing to use is accelerated depreciation, which is a tax break. Now, I don't have access to information like this. And the reason that this whole discussion got started with the assessors was there's training that goes into doing these types of appraisals. I've had it. Pat Meyer had it. It's all the employees of the Department of Revenue that do it. I had it in the context of being the chairman of the Board of Equalization. Okay, so I could understand the tax cases that were coming to us. I think that having the free advice essentially of a county assessor that's had the same training as a state appraiser would allow somebody with a different set of eyes to look at this and figure out what the answer is. I'm concerned that what's going on is that for right, wrong, or different reasons, the industry is not coming up with the books and information that are necessary to do the other types of evaluations. I can't tell you why. I can't tell you for sure even, but it's not looking right to me. And again, when you see two published sources, one being Rod Godbee and one being a big wind project that's coming in, basically taking the same position, the taxes should be lower than what I know any similar energy generation facility it would be if it were coal-fired, for example. It needs to be looked into. So that was how this all got started from my end. I hope that's helpful. I'll answer questions if you have any, but I know you're short of time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Any questions for Chairman Manir?
Thank you
Thanks a
very much.
lot. Who would like to be next? Let's get somebody in the room and then we'll go back online. Anybody in the room want to go to Mr. Garrett? You can, but there are several people who covered it. Come on up, come on. And then let's get a couple more people in the waiting room that might want to testify on something.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one more person in the waiting room. They're a phone participant. So when you're ready, I can unmute them so they can speak out loud.
Excellent, thank you. We'll do them next. Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Richard Garrett with the American Heart Association, and I think I can do this in under 2 minutes. We've heard a lot of discussion this session about Medicaid expansion, so I don't know that I'd need to repeat any of that. I would only urge the committee to follow the advice that we heard on the Senate floor in particular, and that is follow the process and continue to engage on this issue during the interim, find the solution that works for Wyoming. And the reason that it comes to this committee, I think ideally, is because there's a potential at this writing, at this date, of saving the state about $30 million on healthcare coverage. We will work very hard during the interim to nail these numbers down for you. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Questions for Mr. Garrett? Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's take our phone participant, and then if somebody in the room wants to come on up and be ready to go. Going to the telephone.
Mr. Chairman, I have unmuted our participant. I believe it's Neil Tomlinson.
Okay, welcome.
Yes, I'm on. Thank you very much. And thank
Mr.
you,
Thomas.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Case and Chairman Harshman, members of the committee. My name is Neil Tomlinson from the Brownstein Hyatt Law Firm. I'm just here to speak on the request for an interim topic on the regulation and taxation of marijuana. We feel that a deeper dive should be taken to look at the all different sides of marijuana-related activity, including the creation of jobs and a consistent and sustainable revenue source for both the local and state governments. Our firm has substantial experience in other jurisdictions in this area, and we hope to be a resource to the committee and provide white papers and testimony from experts and anything else that the committee may desire on this subject. So we encourage a interim topic on the regulation and taxation of marijuana, and thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. Questions for Mr. Tomlinson? Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. No questions on this side. All right,
Thank you.
Next? Who's next in the room? Are we done? About the
Mr. Chairman,
Department of
no one else in the Zoom waiting room.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Noble, do you want to, you can certainly reflect on all the things you've heard and propose anything else you'd like to. Welcome.
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. I want to point to some of the issues associated with state assessed property and particularly as it relates to wind farms. Obviously, there's some concern about whether they're being valued properly. And it's not unheard of for the state of Wyoming to actually be audited as it relates to our assessment practices, but it's been done before. It's been a long time, and we would welcome that as an alternative to opening up books that and dealing with confidentiality issues that have been a problem in the past. We certainly have offered information to the assessors that was asked for. It was requested. We contacted the companies and it was delivered. So the confidential information has been delivered. We did provide an example of how we do an assessment associated with a wind farm. Granted, it was a sample. It was not a actual data, but we provided them with what exactly that process is. And I think the real issue here is, okay, we don't have a problem with regulated wind farms, but we have a problem with unregulated wind farms. You got to recognize that this is, regardless of the where the data comes from, it is a self-reporting system, just like pretty much most property taxes are. We talked about personal property, that's self-reported as well. And yes, there are ways to kind of validate some of the data associated with regulated wind farms because they report to other parties as well. But it is something that I think people have to understand. When we look at how we value a wind farm, there are three approaches that we utilize, not one. Okay, we looked to the values, income streams, any comparable sales, which there typically aren't, to determine whether or not we're using the appropriate method. And we select it based on the data that we have. If we don't have income, you don't have an alternative. If there's no sales out there, you use cost less depreciation. Certainly understandable. There are instances where there was no income reported, and we've asked for it. I mean, it isn't like we do this in a vacuum. But the thing that I'm concerned about is there a credibility issue here or not? Is the state following appropriate practices or not? There is already a jurisdictional component to that, and that is the State Board of Equalization. They have audited us in the past. In 1995, they did just that.
Mhm.
It might be time to do it again. Quite frankly, we'd welcome it because it's my understanding that this is some sort of a concern about whether we're using proper valuation and whether we're getting the proper data. We'd certainly welcome anyone coming in to make sure that we're following the rules as they apply. We have work sessions. Whenever a company has a question about the cap rate that we've established or anything like that, we work with those companies. If they have a question about their valuation, we work with them as part of this process. And I'd like to follow up on another aspect of this, and that is the issue associated with local assessment and whether there should be caps on what is being done. I don't necessarily agree with creating caps, but I do recognize one thing that has been a problem, and that is there a proper communication between the assessor and the taxpayer as it relates to how their valuation was performed?
Mhm.
What factors were taken into account, what was done, and how it was done, and how you arrived at the value? That's a question that any of us ought to be able to have answered. That's part of being transparent about what we're doing. I think that's really important. You guys some of you may remember, in 2009, there was a bill that was put before the legislature and passed, Senate File 144, which required a document to do just that, tell you as a taxpayer, what was the assessment process, how was it followed, and exactly what was it, that was derived, how it was done. And there's a framework put in place for that. That was repealed in 2016. If you want to see what the document actually looked like prior to that, it's in the annotation, and you can see what it was that was out there. And maybe it's time to look at that because, quite frankly, I as a taxpayer would certainly like to know how someone derived my taxable value. And I think it's important that be something that the taxpayer has a right to.
Was that repealed or did it sunset?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that a lot of the language is taken out of it. I wouldn't say repealed. I would say that the portion of Senate File 144 that dealt with creating a document that became a public record was removed, and we're left with stratification issues.
Right.
Okay. So it's something to look at. I'm not saying that it's the right thing to do, but it is something that you may want to look at because I know that there's been complaints about taxpayers not being able to understand how their taxes were calculated. And I think that's fair to any of us. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Great questions for Mr. Noble. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Noble, is there a standard process for how assessors assess property for every county, or does every assessor do it a different way?
Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that yes, there is a standard that is established. IAAO sets up standards as to how you assess property. There are very, I would call them subjective measures that are used because it isn't an exact science. You're valuing properties on a mass basis, okay, as opposed to each individual property. You're valuing them on a mass basis. So there are factors that are utilized, such as neighborhooding, establishing LEAs. These types of things are complex concepts, but I think it's fair to say that they need to be, I would call, digested into a format that any of us could understand. So it's a complex process. Establishing what fair market value is. You look at sales in a specific area. You look at the quality of property. That you look at all of the different things associated with it to determine how value is done. But I think that I, as a taxpayer, should be able to ask someone, how is my property valued? And I think that's important.
Yeah, follow up.
Follow up, Senator James.
I have like a couple of examples. I'm wondering if you might be able to help me figure it out, because fortunately, for the people I represent, I have no life, so I do a lot of studying. So I've been looking at the map server on county assessors' websites, and I've come across some things that brought questions to my mind. And one thing I found, like for instance, up in Teton County, found a neighborhood, found a property all right next to each other. One property was 3 acres, right at $3,586,000 and some change. Property right next to it, 5 acres, $3,586,000 and change. Property right next to it, 15 acres, $3,586,000 and some change. Whole neighborhood, all different sizes, exact same assessed amount. Over here to Laramie County, found a property for 9.6 acres, valued at $90,000. Go right down the road, same neighborhood. Property 4 acres, $108,000. Then one street over, same neighborhood, 40 acres, right at $60,000. Then you go down street, right behind Frontier Mall, you got 6 10-acre lots, $70,000 each. And I go over to Sweetwater County.
You don't have to go forever, Senator James.
Oh, I got tons of these.
I know.
But anyway, I'm just curious if these are all, if this is a standard process and you have all these, I mean, if they're right next to each other, how is this type of stuff being, how are these type of things happening? And this is happening in these type of neighborhoods. And the small example, the state is missing out on millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I mean, how is this going to get corrected? Are we going to be able to work on this?
I think there's a question there. I appreciate it. Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I guess you basically brought home exactly what I'm trying to describe here, and that is the fact that there needs to be some mechanism in place to help a taxpayer, an individual taxpayer, understand how their property was valued. And I think that's important for all of us. Senate File 144 isn't perfect, and that's one of the reasons I bring it up as an interim topic. I think it needs to be looked at. And are there things that could be done to make it better and allow you to get an answer to your question as it relates to happening? Without knowing the properties individually, I can't answer your question directly, but I can certainly recognize that someone needs to be able to provide an answer to that.
And then
it's important to that.
We'd also want to hear from our assessors and the Assessor Association on this. Of course, they were on the line earlier, but.
So I think that's my process with this, Mr. Chairman. I think it's something that you may want to look at it again, because I know that Representative Gray brought up a really important issue, and that is, okay, there are a lot of assessment and a lot of upset people in a certain county that probably need an answer to what happened to my property value. And I think that's real important to them.
Fair enough. Senator James, give you a quick follow-up, but we are down to 40 minutes. Less than that if we're going to get back to our chairs.
And I think that's more on the assessors than it is the person to have that situation resolved. So that's it.
Great. Anybody else? Questions? Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, from your perspective, what would it take for us to take advantage, to look at and take advantage perhaps of bringing our code up to date, considering the digital economy? You know, I read a report the other day that Netflix had 32 million new subscribers last quarter. Not all in Wyoming, obviously. We've worked on this for a few years that I've been in here, but I just wonder how much is potentially possible if we go back and look at our code and see what would it take to update here and here and here, and then also to incorporate the technology that we have in terms of leveraging the processes so that we're not so manpower intensive.
Okay, Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, you bring up an interesting point and something that I think probably is probably overdue. And I'll give you a classic example, and it associates, it's kind of associated with Netflix. There once was a time there was a store here in town called Blockbusters, and every video that was checked out by all of us was subject to sales tax. You rented it, and rentals were taxable in the state of Wyoming. That disappeared when Blockbuster disappeared. When we moved from the tangible economy to the digital economy, we lost revenue, obviously, a revenue source. Even though the rentals still occurred, we solved some of that as it relates to specified digital products, okay? But the issue now becomes something like a streaming service where you really don't have any real possession of anything on a permanent basis whatsoever. And you're not really renting it. You're buying a subscription for something that allows you access to all sorts of stuff. Another example, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people use TurboTax. I did. I've done it for years. I used to buy it in a box. It was taxable. Used to have it downloaded onto my computer. It was taxable. Now I use it as a service and it's not taxable. It's kind of my point here is that, and to Representative Henderson's point is, we have evolved from a tangible economy to a digital economy, and our tax structure doesn't necessarily follow that evolution. And it's something that may make for an interesting topic anyway, for people to look at.
And other states successfully tax in that area?
Mr. Chairman, some of them are, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Questions? Any other questions for Ms. Noble? Yes, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Noble. Thank you. I think your comments kind of highlighted on this property tax review. I really think we got to be comprehensive on it. Maybe take one day, go through the statute, paragraph by paragraph, and then we bring it into sectors because you got a process from T to green, this whole process and all the different ideas about how we address each one and take each one individually. And one part of that I wanted to ask you about that you haven't talked too much about yet is the appeals process. I mean, I think there's some revisions in there. You could have a revisions bill, but then you have some conceptual issues, the equalization. I mean, obviously some of that's constitutional, but have you thought about the appeals process a little bit and some of the problems there? Because I do think there's some.
Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I think anything that we do is obviously something that should be looked at and have oversight. And as the appeals process, as it stands right now, there's a huge number of appeals sitting in the queue in your county, and I understand that. Is it the appropriate way to handle it? It's something that's been there for a long time, and I don't think we as public servants should be afraid of any oversight and review of that process. If it's something that needs looked at, certainly, I think it's something that we could, bring up as an interim topic and review. It may be for another committee. I don't know. It's really a legal issue as opposed to a revenue issue, but it is something that certainly, like I said, I welcome being audited as it relates to our processes, and I think that's only fair.
But wouldn't it be fair enough to say that the appeals that you're talking about in Natrona County, they're not to the Department of Revenue. They're not about actions of the Department of Revenue. That's a county assessor function. Mr. Noble is not necessarily the right guy to answer that question.
That's fair, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. But the point is well taken.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Director, we had a couple of business personal property bills. You were there for both of them. One is passed. I think it's on second or third reading in the House now on the small accounts, diminished accounts. And then the other was just to get rid of it. And, we talked a little bit about that time there. Some states do this they don't even tax it. They have other legs that they do. It's about 130 million to the state. The distribution of it is mainly local, right, through our property tax system. And I'm just wondering about that. Is there a way that we could, is there a way to make that easier? Is there a statewide way to do that? Is it worth looking at, I guess? Many of our small companies, there's the, sole proprietorships, they're not even registered, you didn't have to. So I guess I'm just wondering, maybe are there other states out there? Is there a gold standard on that kind of thing for us to look at?
Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think it'd be something that'd be worth looking at. Obviously, one of the things that you talked about is that we kind of want to look at the tax structure itself. There's two components associated with removing a part of the tax. And that's, let's just say, I've heard the number to $130 million associated with personal property. If you were to get rid of all business personal property and just not consider that category to be taxed at all, how would you replace that? And when you think about it, there's two issues associated with that. That tax has a specific structure as how it's distributed. Certain mills go to the municipalities, certain go to the county, school districts, and then all of the other special districts that are out there are potentially at loss if you do that. So how do you replace that revenue? And unfortunately, there's only one place where you would have a one-for-one way to approach that, and that would be on the other properties that are being taxed. In other words, all real property, whether it's industrial, commercial, residential. I'm not sure that you'd go to minerals, but it is an area where you would have to look to find a direct one-for-one replacement of those tax dollars.
Because they would have the same distribution.
Exactly, Mr. Chairman.
And if we were to go to a sales tax or an income tax, you'd
That
have
revenue wouldn't be replaced directly. It'd have to be, you'd have to somehow create a separate distribution to replace it.
And go ahead, you need your mic on.
Just trying to think of is there a more efficient way to do this than having all these thousands of little accounts and we're assessing real property, without having to worry about the furniture or the computer or the scraper or whatever it is. And it almost puts a disincentive on buying new equipment. And if we could get away with that, maybe not raise the tax, but kind of substitute it basically where it would, everybody still has the same oars in the water, but it maybe makes it a little fairer and a little easier to assess, frankly.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
And Mr. Co-Chairman, one of the things that's possible is to replace it with a distribution. There's a pot of money, if you will, for your specific county. You know what the mill levies were assessed, and you come up with a mechanism to replace those distributions using that pot of money. Probably not an exact science, but it is a way to do it. Where that pot of money comes from is probably at that point, the difficult piece of this.
And I hear that, Mr. Noble and Mr. Co-Chairman, and it works in kind of a static sense, but as our economy changes over time, those factors move away. And I am haunted by the discussion when we removed the food tax, the tax on food, and we said that we would backfill that for the counties. That haunts everybody to this day because once the year was out, there was no way to backfill because the basis changed. And there was no day, because we weren't even collecting the data anymore, we didn't know what the basis would have been. It's very, so it's something to think about.
Mr. Chairman, I did that distribution.
I remember.
For a couple of years while it was going on, and it was anything but painless. It was difficult to do.
And now we're kind of back where that, if you want to fund local government and you want something powerful, restoring the food tax is something that gets them a pretty significant chunk of change in the local coffers pretty directly. Mr. Noble, I have a kind of a general question. We're a pretty new committee here. I mean, there's some old faces, but we would count on the department and the assessors and folks to give us educational, to learn more about our tax structure. And I might let you speculate very briefly about how our tax structure compares to other states. We've often talked about South Dakota, for example, and what's happening in the world, where our taxes come from, how that's changing, and your thoughts on that. They've given you about maybe 5 minutes, and then we can do this in part of the interim more along this. We'll hear from our assessors and everything as well as industry. We want to learn about our taxpayers in Wyoming. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to wing this one because I'm not really sure where you want me to go with it. Wyoming is one of, I believe, 7 states that do not impose an income tax. There are, I think there is a state that actually imposes a tax on unearned income, which I believe was a bill that was up this year, right. But does not tax other components of it. But we are stuck with a tax model that, and this was brought up in Tax Reform 2000. There was a discussion about the fact that the three-legged stool is missing one of its legs as it relates to the taxation of and how we approach it. We tax property, we tax sales, but we do not tax income. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, it is exactly how we're structured. Our Constitution provides exemptions, if you will, or I should say credits for any of those taxes that would be that we impose today if we were to begin imposing an income tax. And it's not a deduction, and like it is in other states, it is a credit, a dollar for dollar reduction in the tax bill once it's established. So that in of itself creates some complexities associated with imposing that third leg of the stool, if you will. But it is something that we've had to look at. Are there states that are successful, in managing their finances without mineral wealth, that have the similar tax structure? And that's why we looked to South Dakota. It is a state that is almost identical to the state of Wyoming in size, fairly similar in population, and it doesn't have an income tax either, neither corporate or individual. The difficulty comes in what they tax. They have a sales tax, but it's on virtually anything that you can imagine. They tax most services. They do not tax health-related services, but they tax most everything else. Digital services, they're big in taxation of digital services, subscription services, all of that. And they have a very high property tax. I did a study here a while back, and a $200,000 home in Wyoming, roughly $1,100 to $1,200 in property tax. Same home in South Dakota, $2,600 to $3,000, depending on where you're located in South Dakota. Who pays that tax is probably just as important as how much is paid. When you look at property taxation, and I brought this up before, a fairly substantial amount of the property taxes is paid by the agricultural industry in South Dakota on property tax. That's something you probably don't want to talk about much, but it is a reality of how it's distributed amongst the different people that pay. And really, when you look at it, do we want to end up there or not? I know I don't want to end up paying that kind of property tax, but the fact is that's how they do it. Where do we go? Do you look at an income tax? That's obviously public policy, but it is complicated by our constitutional issues. And I guess I'll stop there. We obviously have gone over this a number of times.
Not with these new people, though.
That's true.
It's really a new committee. So please, anybody, any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
We'll go co-chairman, then we'll go Representative Roscoe.
Mr. Chairman, and you know about the agricultural rate, and just had that discussion today. In fact, I think it's $500 to, I don't call it the ag exemption, but it's basically the ag rate, which is, it's not nothing, but it's close to nothing, right? It's not much. I think even the folks who represent ag realize, and we had a bill a couple of years ago, I've heard just today in conversations, to raise that 10,000 or at least 3,000, you know, and I'm sure you can get that kind of data. I mean, on these hobby kind of farmers who have a couple chickens but just enough to get $500 to change your property tax dramatically. I'm sure there's some information out there on how much probably be useful down the road to find that sweet spot. You know, obviously you want to give a break to the new young couple who's starting into the business, certainly. But I think the other side of that are folks who are coming here and buying nice swaths of land and selling $500 worth of eggs to take a nice break on their property.
Thank you. Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nober, other states that have an income tax, do they, personal income tax, do they generally speaking have a corporate income tax as well? Is that, might be an unfair question, but is that a combination of things often? Thank you.
And Representative Roscoe, I might pitch that I think you'll find it's kind of the other way. More states have the corporate tax than have the personal, but Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I think there are more states out there that have both. There are some that just have the corporate, I believe. And I'll certainly, and there's another hybrid out there. And I believe at the last count, there were 9 states that have it, and it's called the gross receipts tax. Now, the difference between a gross receipts tax and an income tax is you pay a certain percentage based on what your gross receipts were. Doesn't matter whether you earned an income or not, because there are no deductions for it or anything like that. You just basically say, here's what my gross revenues were, and here's the tax associated with that number. Simple in implementation, difficult in I guess I'd say justification and fairness as it relates to the actual tax itself. That's probably the biggest knock on the gross receipts tax, is that it's kind of like the property tax. You pay it whether you make income or not.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Representative Gray.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be quick here. You know, I got a call from Natrona County here the other day. It's the other side of this ag valuation, which is they purchased an ag property and they're having a hard time getting it classified that way. Really hard time. I mean, like I guess the assessor's dragging their feet or something. I mean, and they brought up the issue of making it a lot easier, almost automatic, you know, okay, maybe that's not the right word, but is that an issue? Because I did get a call about that. And maybe that's part of the comprehensive look too.
And this is, once again, a lot of these tax discussions are about what our local assessors' policies are and how they do this. And I wish they were here in person. We could bring them back online, but Mr. Noble, if you can, and
Mr. Chairman, I think, and Representative Gray, I mean, you bring up a good point. The assessor is tasked with determining, okay, did you earn $500 worth of income in order to qualify for this on a 40-acre plot, if you will? And that's really the dilemma that they're faced with. How do you qualify that property? Is it better to just make the assumption that it's ag? That would probably cost the state a great deal of revenue. You probably shouldn't go down that path. And really, the attraction for having it valued as ag is it's based on the productive value of the land as opposed to what its actual fair market value is. Okay, and that's how ag land is valued, and that is a carve out of the fair market value principle. Is it something that should be resolved quickly? That's something the assessors are going to have to speak to, because quite frankly, it isn't our job to do that. We obviously have oversight function on it, but the issue is how do you demonstrate that you're earning a an income off of that property in order for it to be qualified as ag. And I think that's something that will probably vary from county to county.
Fair enough. We do have the assessors online. We're really running short of time, but if you don't mind, I might go to the legislative person at the assessors, Ms. Huxtable. And Mr. Meyer, you can weigh in too afterwards. We've only got less than 20 minutes because we got to be back in our chairs. So go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Noble. We're counting on you. Ms. Huxtable.
Mr.
You
Chair.
can comment on any of the local assessed issues you've heard about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dixie Huxtable again, Converse County Assessor and Legislative Chair. In regards to the agricultural discussion, the Department of Revenue does give us guidance and some forms that are used that all assessors have access to and all assessors use. There are 4 qualifications that must be met to qualify for agricultural status, and they are the same in every county. It's how the assessor in that county gathers the information to substantiate that qualification. It has to be being used to produce an agricultural product. It cannot be subdivided, and if it's subdivided, it cannot be smaller than 35 acres. I think and it has to be used to its capability. That's one of the biggest ones that is a stickler across the state is if the land is capable of running 40 pairs and you're only running 5, you get ag, even if you met the $500 threshold. So there's a lot of things into this, and I'd be happy to work with the assessors. Would be happy to work with the Revenue Committee on some education on how this is done. There are some subjective things in regards to that use. Is it being used to its capability? And then the biggest stickler is probably the dollar amount that an owner must generate, if they're operating it themselves, $500 worth of product. If they're leasing it out, the leasee has to generate $1,000 in their production. And so those are pretty small numbers to meet. But if they're not using the land to the capability that it's capable of doing, then they may not still qualify. So that may seem inequitable, may seem difficult, but those guidelines are out there for every assessor to use. And it's just a matter of whether they can get the documentation to support it. In regards to Director Noble talked about the Senate File 144, that repealing of that. We still give a stratification document currently to the Department of Revenue and the State Board of Equalization when we submit our values. So there is still that process going on. Whether or not it is shared with all the taxpayers, I can't answer that for every county. Certainly prepare that information for my county, and I can't speak for other counties, but we do still do a stratification document. So it's not like when that got repealed, it went away totally. Maybe there's some communication things that need to be worked on in specific counties, but that is still out there. So I would leave that. If you have any questions, and I see my colleague, Mr. Meyer, popped back on the screen too. So if there's any questions, I can answer them, or I'm sure Pat would be happy to talk.
Okay, we're really running short of time. Pat, is there anything you could add? You're muted.
Well, just one thing first on the ag, because I've been dealing with it for the last 30 years. What was legislative intent for agricultural rates in the beginning? I mean, I asked that way back when Nancy Friedenthal was the chairman of the State Board of Equalization. And she told me at that time, there was no history in Wyoming of what legislative intent was. So did they want to help out the ranchers and farmers and not tax them out of their property? Or did they want to provide, you'll hear this in the discussion, open spaces. Everybody's worried if they didn't have the agricultural rates, we'll have to subdivide all our land and so forth. And why isn't there a minimum amount of acres to get rid of hobby farmers? You shouldn't be able to get agricultural rates with 15 acres, even if you're making the $500, which is pretty easy if you have it in hay. You know, and Dixie's correct on assuming you got to be using it to its max, but that's really hard. If you've got a 10,000 acre ranch, a lot of them aren't using it to its max. You know, there's different things there too, where we're letting, as far as uniformity, where we're letting that little guy who's got it in hay, but if the other guy doesn't put his application incorrect and name the right amount of cows on there, he's not going to get it. So we could make this a lot easier, and I'd be willing to work with you guys on that. As far as Senate File 144, we repealed it because none of the taxpayers were looking at it. They didn't want to know how we did the whole county. They want to know how their house is being valued. And as county assessors, you should be able to explain that process to any taxpayer. We've gotten a lot of transparency by putting on web pages that show you the square footage, the value of your neighbor's house, and so forth. You, as county assessors, we should be able to explain that process.
Thanks, Assessor Meyer.
You're welcome.
We're just kind of running up against the deadline here. Let me turn to staff. Do you think it's feasible to set up a Google poll over the next, it doesn't have to be today. We're not going to rush in and circulate it among the members is it possible?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we can do that. We'll do a summary of everything we did here. And I think some of these, of course, can sort of be combined.
That's what I'm thinking.
So send it to you too as chairman. And then, yeah, we'll figure out a way we can maybe send out a poll so people can do ranking. I don't know if it'll be a Google poll or whatever, but some
kind of
way
a poll. Yeah.
we can do a ranking and.
That's right, because if we did a Google poll, we wouldn't be paying taxes on that. If we did a paper poll, we would pay taxes on that. Does and then kind of the thinking would be that the co-chairman and I would sit down and work through it, try to take advantage of your rankings. There's some things I think we think just have to be done that we need to propose. We depend on our taxpayers and tax friends in the audience. Plan to go around the state. Mr. Co-Chairman has some specific timing issues that we want to account for. Likely we'll be in a couple places around the state and then back here in Cheyenne. We would like to see facilities of our taxpayers, maybe something different that we haven't done before. And that'd be like a trona mine or a oil production, refineries, mines, something like that. Mr. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if I might be able to have some time to give some further explanation on mine.
Do you say online or on yours?
Further explanation on my idea.
How
since
about,
I wasn't able to
about
earlier.
like 3 minutes? Can we do it?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my proposal was to change the severance tax into a usage fee, and that would include the people outside of Wyoming. And so that everyone that uses the coal, oil, wind, solar, and gas outside of Wyoming would now pay this usage fee. And so I'd like to submit that during the interim and this committee, we talked to the energy sector on how to implement this plan in the most efficient way. And the way I see it working is it would need to go through the company, and the company would then charge the customer this fee. And so it would be everyone outside of Wyoming, and I see this bringing in a massive amount of revenue. This can be measured across all 5 types of energy equally as a BTU. We will need to bring in these companies to ensure there's an equal charge, because one thing I've heard is coal, oil, and gas saying that wind and solar isn't being treated the same. So this would bring in wind and solar, and all 5 would now be able to be charged the same. So yeah, that's my idea.
Thank you. Questions for Senator James? Any questions? During the interim, we've kind of began to look at the subject of a electricity gross receipts tax. The idea has been moving forward in terms of refining to allow the taxpayers to deduct all the other taxes paid from the gross receipts of electricity sales. And since electricity it's a big export commodity, as you all know, and its base for generation is changing. If you take the amount of electricity production and then subtract off the other taxes paid in the state, whether it's severance, sales, and ad valorem, then it kind of works out to approach what you're talking about in a bit of a way. And it does come back to whether those other taxes should be deducted or not. And that's what our Constitution, of course, says about an income tax, right? Everybody says, well, that's a major obstacle. Mr. Noble, you even said it. It's a major obstacle to implementing a income tax in Wyoming. I kind of think that it's a major asset. And then what it really says is, if a taxpayer is paying a lot of other taxes, they're not going to get hit by this. I think that fits with this same idea. If you allow the other taxes to be offset against your new tax, then it is a great equalizer across technologies and taxpayer contribution to the state. So it's kind of complementary.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman, I'd just like to say that this wouldn't be a new tax. This would just be restructuring the severance tax and spreading, making sure it's charging the people outside of the state. So we wouldn't be implementing anything new on the people inside of the state. So that's what I want to make sure that we're doing here. We're making sure that we're charging everyone outside of the state that is using the resources inside our state.
Okay, well, I just have to understand it better. You're going to have to.
Yeah. So that's what I want to
You're
make
going to have
sure
to pitch
that.
it better.
Okay. So that's what we're doing here.
Okay. Any more discussion on that issue? Any questions?
Just,
Go ahead, Representative Sweeney.
so you better have several days blocked off. Public Service Commission is going to have to be involved.
Sure.
In that discussion, and, you know, every load of coal going down to Texas, and those are regulated in different ways, different effects. And I personally, it's a concept, I guess.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. Anybody else? Mr. Co-Chairman, anything else?
Just need House members around me.
Okay. Everybody, thank you very much for your indulgence. We'll see you in the end.